My grandfather had just been lowered into the ground 3 days earlier when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I was washing out his favorite coffee mug, the chipped blue one, with the faded lighthouse on it that he'd used every single morning for 30 years, when I saw the text from my brother. "We're in Bali. Don't wait up." Transfer went through. I set the mug down very slowly and smiled because I'd already moved the $420,000 the day before his flight. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm sitting here with a warm cup of coffee, just watching the view and thinking about how quiet mornings often hold the most weight. It's in these still moments that we find the clarity to act. I'd love to know where you're listening from today and what your favorite drink is. Now, let's see how that clinical anger began to take shape. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just opened my laptop, adjusted my glasses, and started clicking cancel. In my world, as an estate audit expert, relationships aren't defined by blood. They are defined by ledgers. And my brother, Tyler, had been in the red for a very long time. He thought he was clever, slipping away to a luxury resort in Bali while the dirt was still fresh on our grandfather Frank's grave. He and his wife, Abigail, had spent the last week hovering over the estate files, like vultures in designer clothes. I realized Tyler hadn't just started this 3 days ago. He'd been prepping those fraudulent loan applications while Frank was still breathing, waiting for the funeral to hit send so he could disappear in the chaos of our grief. They assumed my quietness was grief-induced paralysis. They thought the responsible sister would be too busy mourning to notice the surgical strike they were planning on the Heritage Ranch accounts. They were wrong. My compassion for Tyler had been a luxury he'd overdrafted for years. This wasn't a family feud anymore. It was accounting. I sat at the mahogany desk in the ranch office, the same one where Frank used to sign the payroll for the ranch hands. The air smelled of old paper and cedar. I wasn't just the sister they ignored. I was the executor. I checked the timestamp on his Bali text, 9:54 a.m. local time. Luckily, as the court-appointed executor with the letters testamentary already in my digital file, I didn't need a judge's permission to flip the switch. I was the law now. By 10:06, I had already executed the freeze on the estate's corporate line of credit. Lethal precision is always quiet. Tyler and Abigail had been bleeding Heritage Ranch dry for months, thinking I was too distracted by our grandfather's decline to notice. They treated my reliability as a leash, believing, right up until this moment, that I would always choose peace over justice, because the cost of justice was too high for someone like me. They didn't account for what happens when you watch someone exhaust your patience completely. Abigail had spent the last 5 days taking inventory of the house, looking at the antiques like she was browsing a furniture catalog. She even had the nerve to offer to help with the paperwork the night before they left. I'd smiled and thanked her, while mentally noting the exact location of the security keys she was trying to locate. Now they were thousands of miles away. They thought they had landed in paradise, with our grandfather's legacy in their pockets. But the transfer didn't go through, not the way they planned. I'd moved the $420,000 into a secure vault. They couldn't even see, let alone touch. I left exactly $12,000 in the original account, enough to look like a clerical oversight, enough to let them check into their resort, only to find the vault was empty when the real bills arrived. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I took a sip of water from my grandfather's mug. The water was cold. My mind was colder. Tyler wanted a vacation from reality. I was about to give him a permanent one. I kept wondering, for a long time, what did I ever do wrong? Growing up at Heritage Ranch, the hierarchy was established before I could even walk. My brother, Tyler, was 4 years older, a gap he interpreted as a permanent authority he'd never actually earned. He was the golden child, the one whose every mediocre achievement was celebrated like a national holiday, while I was the invisible stagehand who kept the show running. People often ask why victims of toxic families stay for so long. They see the silence and mistake it for weakness. They see the compliance and call it cowardice. But they don't understand the invisible chain of a survivor. For years, I'd been living in a house where love was a limited currency, and I was always in the red. My silence wasn't a choice, it was a survival strategy. I learned early on that to speak up was to invite a storm, so I became the eye of that storm, quiet, observant, and perfectly still. I had spent decades as the unpaid accountant of their emotional chaos, balancing books that were never meant to be settled. I was the silent investor in their version of family, footing the emotional bill, while they spent my grandfather's patience like it was an infinite resource. My grandfather, Frank, was a man who believed in family more than the evidence warranted. But Frank wasn't blind. 6 months before his diagnosis turned into a death sentence, he sat me down at the same mahogany desk I'm sitting at now. He pushed a thick manila folder toward me and said, "Grace, I need the person who actually understands this stuff to be in charge." He knew Tyler saw the ranch as a vault to be looted. He knew I saw it as a legacy to be guarded. Tyler didn't appreciate that decision. He spent our entire childhood treating my reliability as a leash, thinking he could jerk it whenever he needed a payout. He saw my quiet nature as a sign that I would always choose peace over justice. But the thing about peace in a house like ours is that it's usually just a polite word for submission. I don't remember how long that feeling of being less than lasted. All I know is that by the time I was 29, I wasn't the same person anymore. The scars hadn't faded, but they had hardened into something like armor. I wasn't just a sister anymore. I was a professional auditor, and I was looking at a family tree that was rotten at the core. Tyler thought he was leaving me with a heavy weight to carry alone. He didn't realize that when you give a survivor the keys to the kingdom, they don't just sit on the throne, they change the locks. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at my desk at the ranch, reviewing a list of outstanding property taxes, when my phone lit up with an international number. I recognized the country code for Indonesia. I let it ring twice, then 3 times, allowing the silence to establish the new boundary. When I finally answered, I didn't say hello, I just waited. "Grace." Tyler's voice was high-pitched, vibrating with a panic he tried to mask as rage. I could hear the ambient sounds of a luxury resort in the background, the gentle splash of a pool, the clink of overpriced glasses, and a distant lounge track that felt absurdly out of place against the quiet dignity of the ranch we'd spent our lives sweating for. "What the hell did you do? We're trying to check into the second leg of our trip, and the card was declined. The app said the transfer for the $420,000 was initiated. We saw the green check mark. But now the bank says the funds are on hold for manual verification. Where is the money, Grace?" In the background, I heard Abigail's shrill voice echoing off the marble walls of their suite. "Tyler, the manager is here with security. They're locking the minibar and saying, 'Our reservation is void. Tell her to fix it now.'" "I did my job, Tyler," I said, my voice as level as a ledger line. "I'm the executor of this estate, Tyler. You saw a scent screen and popped champagne, but you didn't stay logged in long enough to see the fraud alert I'd preset. In my world, a transfer isn't through until the auditor approves the ledger." "Secured? You stole it," he screamed. "That money was supposed to be divided equally. You know that's what Frank wanted. You're a thief, Grace. You've always been a petty, jealous little brat, and now you're finally showing your true colors. You're crazy if you think you can get away with this." I didn't flinch. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon even a flicker of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a balance sheet being reconciled. Then Abigail took the phone. I knew it because the yelling stopped and was replaced by that syrupy, reasonable tone she used whenever she was trying to manipulate someone into a corner. "Grace, honey, let's all just take a breath. We know you're under so much stress. Managing a ranch like Heritage is a massive weight for someone with your limited experience. This is all just a big misunderstanding. We only wanted access to the account so we could help you handle the bureaucracy. You don't have to carry this load alone. I looked out the window at the sprawling Texas hills. I thought about the $38,000 in credit card debt they were hiding. I thought about their mortgage, which was 4 months behind. Listening to them, I realized the trap they were in. It was the illusion of power that comes with an empty wallet. Tyler and Abigail lived in the world of having, not being. Their entire social status, their confidence, and even their love for our grandfather was just a costume they'd rented with money they didn't have. Their authority was a shell, an empty facade, held together by the expectation of a payout. Now that the cash had stopped flowing, they weren't just broke, they were disappearing. "I'm not operating on assumptions, Abigail," I said coldly. "I know about the debt. I know the business you claimed to launch folded before the doors ever opened." "You bitch!" Tyler's voice came back, distant, as if he'd grabbed the phone back. "We'll sue you. We'll tell everyone you manipulated a dying man. The only thing you'll be telling is a judge how you managed to notarize a loan application for a dead man," I replied. I didn't wait for a response. I hung up and went back to my spreadsheet. The audit was no longer a theory. It was an active recovery, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just observing the deficit, I was eliminating it. Everything stayed silent for days after that call, but in my head, their words kept echoing not as hurt, but as evidence. I didn't spend that time waiting for an apology. I spent it in my supervising attorney's office, surrounded by the clinical glow of computer screens and the scent of old paper. My husband, Benjamin, sat beside me, his steady presence the only thing in the room that wasn't transactional. Sarah, my boss and mentor for 6 years, didn't offer me a tissue. She offered me a highlighter. We weren't looking for family memories anymore. We were looking for the exact moment Tyler had crossed the line from greed to a felony. "Here," Sarah said, sliding a digitized bank record across the desk. Tyler thought he was slick, but the moment the bank filed the UCC-1 lien against the Iron King, an automated alert hit my encrypted email. In the world of high-stakes accounting, there are no secrets, only delays in reporting. Tyler hadn't just gone after the cash. He'd gone after the Iron King, our prize-breeding bull, and the biological engine of the entire ranch. He had used the Iron King as additional collateral to tap into the farm's pre-approved emergency business line of credit. By leveraging the bull's massive appraisal value, he bypassed the usual weeks of bank scrutiny and triggered an immediate $110,000 cash draw. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It said, Frank Henderson. But the F was too shaky, and the K lacked the sharp, downward stroke my grandfather had used every day for 80 years. It was a clumsy, desperate forgery. The notary seal is from a UPS store 2 hours north of here. I tracked the stamp's serial number to a clerk who happened to be Tyler's old high school drinking buddy. One mention of notary fraud and licensure revocation to the store manager, and the clerk folded. He admitted Tyler signed it himself while he looked the other way for a $100 kickback. Frank was in hospice that day. He couldn't even lift a glass of water, let alone drive 2 counties over to sign a loan agreement. I already pulled the security footage from the branch where he tried to deposit the check, Sarah added. It's Tyler, standing there in his designer sunglasses, acting like he owns the world. I rubbed my temples, looking at the balance sheet of betrayal. The Iron King was appraised at $125,000 just last year. By mortgaging the bull, Tyler hadn't just stolen money, he had crippled the ranch's ability to operate. He was willing to burn down the entire family legacy just to stop his own house from going into foreclosure. "How do you want to handle this?" Benjamin asked, his voice low and cautious. "I want the county prosecutor involved," I said. My voice was calm, factual, and lethal. This wasn't a sibling rivalry anymore. It was a crime scene. Tyler had spent his whole life believing I would always choose peace over justice because the cost of family was too high. He believed my reliability was his safety net. He didn't realize that I was done being the silent investor in his chaos. I was an auditor, and when an account is this far out of balance, there is only one way to fix it. You don't forgive the debt. You collect it. File the complaint, Sarah, I said, handing back the highlighter. I stared at the digitized image of the loan application until the letters blurred into a dark, jagged line. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady, a familiar stillness that always comes when the truth finally outweighs the lie. I wasn't just looking at a forged signature anymore. I was looking at the desecration of a sacrifice. Tyler knew. That was the thought that kept circling my mind, like a predator. He knew exactly which animal he was offering up to the bank for that $110,000. He didn't pick a random heifer or a piece of machinery. He chose the Iron King. To anyone else, the king was just a prize bull, appraised at $125,000. But in the history of Heritage Ranch, he was a living monument. He carried the direct, pure bloodline that my parents had given their lives to protect. I don't remember exactly how old I was when the storm hit the valley, but the smell of rain still makes my throat tighten. It was a flash flood, the kind that turns a peaceful creek into a wall of mud and death. My parents didn't run for the house when the sirens went off. They stayed out in the pasture, fighting through waist-deep water to guide the foundation, herd the ancestors of the Iron King to the high ridges. They saved the line, but the water took them. I grew up knowing that every calf born on this ranch was a testament to their final act of love. Tyler was there at the funeral. He saw the mud on their boots. And yet, he had looked at that legacy and saw nothing but a way to pay off his 4 months of overdue mortgage. He used the direct descendant of our parents' sacrifice as a pawn for his designer lifestyle. This wasn't just fraud. It was a spiritual insult. It was a clinical, calculated betrayal that stripped away any remaining obligation I felt toward him. Grace? Benjamin's voice broke through the silence of the office. He was watching me, his eyes full of a concern that I could no longer afford to feel. "I'm done," I said. The words didn't feel like a breakdown, they felt like a verdict. I realized then that my silence had been a prison without bars. For 29 years, I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, but that peace was just a contract I had been paying for with my own dignity. I had been the silent investor in his version of family, but the business was officially bankrupt. This was the kill shot. I reached for the phone and called Sarah back. "Don't just file the complaint," I told her, my voice cold and lethal. "Notify the county prosecutor that we have evidence of criminal intent to defraud a heritage estate, and tell them we are not interested in a settlement." My compassion had reached its credit limit. Tyler wanted to play with the legacy of the dead. Now, he was going to find out what happens when the one person who remembered the sacrifice finally stops protecting him. They flew back 4 days later. I didn't pick them up out of kindness, but because I needed them in the room I had arranged, and I wasn't going to give them the chance to regroup before we sat down. They didn't look like they had just come from a tropical paradise. Tyler's expensive linen shirt was wrinkled, and Abigail's designer sunglasses couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. They looked like people who had been processed through a shredder and taped back together. I watched through the library window as Tyler marched toward the front door of Heritage Ranch with the confidence of a man who still thought his birthright was a skeleton key. He shoved his old brass key into the lock and twisted. Nothing happened. He tried again, jiggling it with a force that bordered on violence, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red. I opened the door just enough for the security chain to catch. The physical act of removing his access felt like a small, quiet revolution. "The locks are new, Tyler," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was clinical, and so is the ownership. Your name isn't on anything anymore. "Open this door, Grace," he roared, pounding his fist against the oak. "We're family. You can't lock us out of our own legacy." I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me. I held folder number 2 against my chest like a shield. "This isn't a family dispute, Tyler. It's an audit." I slid the folder open. Inside is the evidence of your $110,000 fraudulent loan against the Iron King. I have the notary records from that UPS store, your cell phone logs from the night before the forgery, and the security footage of you standing in the bank branch wearing those same sunglasses. The silence that followed was absolute. Tyler's jaw dropped, and he looked at Abigail, but for once, she had no pivot left. The illusion of their power had finally met the reality of their debt. "Grace, please," Tyler stammered, his voice suddenly stripped of its edge and sounding small, pathetic. He actually took a step back and slumped onto the porch steps. We were desperate. The mortgage, the debt, it was all collapsing. We only needed a head start. "You're my sister. You wouldn't really send me to prison over a bull?" "You didn't just steal from an estate," I said, looking him directly in the eyes. "You desecrated the one thing our parents died to protect. You treated their sacrifice as a line of credit." He reached out as if to grab my hand, begging for family mercy, but I withdrew. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single drop of pity, but my compassion had reached its credit limit years ago. "I've already filed the criminal complaint with the county prosecutor. If you don't sign the relinquishment documents in folder number 1, I'm not interested in a settlement." Tyler looked at the folder, then back at me. He looked like a man who had been running a bluff for 33 years and had just been shown everyone else's cards. The power had flipped. He wasn't the authority anymore. He was just a debtor in the red, and I was the one collecting. The scratch of the pen on paper was the only sound in the ranch library as Tyler signed the document. He initialed pages 3, 4, and 11 with a hand that shook like a leaf in a Texas north wind. He wasn't just signing away his claim to a multi-million-dollar estate. He was signing away the authority he had used to diminish me since I was a child. Abigail sat beside him, her face a mask of frozen silence, as she realized the cash cow had finally left the barn. They left an hour later, carrying nothing but the $30,000 specified in the original will and a set of vintage hand tools from the workshop. I watched their taillights fade into the dust of the driveway from the window seat. There was no explosion, no grand final argument, just the quiet, heavy realization that they were no longer my problem to solve. My compassion for them had been a subscription I was no longer willing to fund. In the months that followed, I used the recovered assets, the $420,000 in savings, and the restitution Tyler was forced to pay to establish the Eleanor Fund. It wasn't a move made out of spite, but a strategic investment in the future. We now provide scholarships and legal support for young agricultural professionals who have been excluded from their own family legacies. This wasn't just revenge, it was the justice of the sower, turning the ashes of betrayal into fertile ground for others. I've come to realize that many people in toxic families are told that loyalty is a one-way street. They are taught that to protect themselves is to be harsh or unproductive. But I've learned that there is a profound difference between an open door and an unlocked vault. Grace is something you give freely, but you should never hand someone the key to your own destruction and hope they'll do the right thing. Tolerance without boundaries is not kindness. It is just complicity with evil. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that you are not a burden or a supporting character in someone else's drama. You are the executor of your own life. Sometimes, the most professional thing you can do is conduct an audit on your relationships and close the accounts that no longer balance. I still sit in the window seat where my grandfather used to eat his apple cake. The view of the ranch is the same, but the air feels different, lighter, cleaner. I bring actual homemade apple cake now, using my grandmother's old recipe. I realized that the best revenge wasn't watching Tyler fail, it was becoming the person he said I could never be, a woman who is peaceful, powerful, and entirely her own. Does Grace's journey change how you view your own family boundaries? If you've ever had to stand your ground against a toxic relative, let me know your story in the comments. Your courage might be the exact spark someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like and follow for more stories of justice and personal revolution.